Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vashveshvari Mata ki jai. We'll go on with chapter 29 from the Devi Bhagavatam, retold by Ramesh, Menon. King Janamejaya said in a low, keen voice, O Vedavyasa, strange delight fills me when I hear about the Devi's deeds. I feel I want to hear them over and over again. But first, tell me how I can worship the Devi and hope to have her grace. Vedavyasa said, once the good king Saratha of Kola was betrayed by his ministers to a marauding horde. They divided his own army against him and routed. Saratha fled into a jungle. In one day, that king lost everything. He plunged blindly through the jungle, tears streaming down his face, and arrived by fate in the ashram of the Rishi Sumeta. The hermitage was built on the banks of a turquoise blue river, and it was like a bit of heaven fallen into the world. Exotic fruits and flowering trees grew around the little log huts that served as shelters for the Munis and his disciple. Wild creatures came there, and deer and tiger lay side by side with no enmity between them. It was as if the lust of the hunt dare not enter into Sumeta's ashram. The air was full of songs. Under the trees sat the Munis, many disciples, and their chanting of the Vedas was like a sacrament upon the air. Saratha stood for a moment at the edge of the glade, and immediately fear and grief left his mind as the deep peace of the ashram swept over the vanquished king's spirit. He tethered his horse to a tree and walked into the hermitage like a man walking into a beautiful dream. He felt he would like to spend the rest of his ruined life there. Saratha saw the Rishi Sumeta sitting under a large tree that stood at the very heart of the glade. The Muni's body was attenuated by his long tapasya, and his slender form was perfectly quiescent, swathed in light. He was gently expounding the Vedas to his disciples who hung on every word. Just to see that holy man filled Saratha with a joy past his understanding. Tears filled the king's eyes, and without a word he went and fell at the Muni's feet. Sumeta saw that this visitor was no ordinary man. He offered the king a seat of dharma grass to sit on. The rishi asked, "Who are you, friend? Why do you weep? Is there anything we can do for you?" "I am Saratha, and I was king of Kola. But I was vanquished in battle, and I have lost my kingdom, my wealth, my army, my queen, and my children. I have come seeking sanctuary. I will do whatever you say, for there is no one in this world that can help me but you. I fear my enemies are out hunting me. Save me, Muni, or I am lost." The rishi gazed in the king's eyes for a moment, and the king had the eerie feeling that the sage was gazing into his very destiny. Then the Muni said, "Stay here in my ashram, O king. By the power of my tapasya, your enemies will never find this place. But as long as you are here, you may not kill any living creature. You will have to live on wild rice, fruit, and roots as the rest of us do." The king agreed readily and began living in relative peace in the ashram. One day he went for a walk by himself in the jungle and sat under a shady mango tree. The king thought, "The robbers have my kingdom, and they are savage men. I am sure that they persecute my people, and I am sure my poor elephants and horses don't get properly fed. My servants must either be in prison or begging in the streets, and as for my queen and the women of my harem, I dare not think of what they are subjected to." As Saratha sat ruminating sadly under the tree, he saw a man approaching who seemed to have been crying and looked somber. Saratha beckoned to the stranger, who seemed to be in trouble, and asked him to sit at his side under the mango tree. When the man sat with a deep sigh, the king asked him, "Who are you, friend? Why are you so distressed?" The wise say that two men who exchange 7 words with each other become friends. Speak to me, tell me why you are so sad. The man thought Saratha was a Muni and said to him, I am a Vaishya, and my name is Samadhi. I am a devout man, but my wife and my sons are not like me. They have always been greedy for money. Why, friends, they took everything I owned and threw me out of my house, saying, I am a miser. His eyes filled again, then controlling himself, the Vaishya said, But tell me, who are you, stranger? From your face you seem to be a noble and fortunate man. I am King Saratha of Kola. My own ministers betrayed me, and I was driven out from my kingdom. Well met, Vaishya. We are both in distress, and we shall make good friends. Let us spend our time together here in the heart of the forest. Let us forget our troubles and find our serenity. But the Vaishya cried, how can I be serene, my friend, O king? I yearn for my wife and sons, and to be with them in our house, despite what they've done to me. Saratha was amazed. How can you yearn for them when they have betrayed you? Even enemies are better than relatives who torment a man. Calm yourself, my friend. See where the truth lies, and remain here in the forest in peace. But the Vaishya cried, my friend, I miss my wife and son sorely, and I cannot help myself. Perhaps they even miss me and regret what they have done. How shall I find peace when my mind is restless as the wind? Saratha confessed, to tell you the truth, I too am poor at peace. I worry constantly about my kingdom and the havoc the robbers must be wreaking on it. What shall we do, friend? The king said, there is an enlightened rishi's ashram nearby. It is there that I live now. Come, friend, Samadhi, let us go to the wise one and ask him for a cure for our grief. The Vaishya agreed, and the two friends went to meet Sumedha. They found the Holy One at meditation under his tree, where he was perfectly tranquil, his face bright and a smile full of kindness on his lips. They prostrated themselves before him, and then Saratha said, My lord, this is Samadhi, the Vaishya. We met in the forest. He and I are both tormented by misfortune, O Muni, for just as I have lost my kingdom, he has lost his home. Sumedha said, I thought you were at peace in my ashram, Saratha. I have surely found some peace, my lord, but my mind turns back repeatedly to dark thoughts of my kingdom. I think of my people suffering and of what indignities my queen and my children have to endure. I think of my servants and how they must be persecuted by the invader. Rishi, I know this world is all Maya, a dream. Yet I have not found the detachment that lifts a man above joy and sorrow and makes him calm. All night I dream of my horses and elephants and how lean and starved they must be without their proper feed. What must they think, except that I have abandoned them? I know that they are just beasts and no kin of mine, but all night I see their sad eyes full of tears, and I hear them cry piteously in the dark. And just like my friend Samadhi, my mind will not be still. Great Master, nothing is hidden from you. Tell us both how we can find some happiness again. The Rishi Sumedha smiled, and he said gently, the Mula Prakriti, the Divine Mother, the Devi Maya, is the one who binds and frees all creatures in this universe. She is the cause of causes. If you worship her, she will bring you joy to your spirits. Samadhi asked, how do we worship the Divine Mother, O Muni? Aim Hrim Kling Chamundaya Viche is her mantra. Also, you should do the ritual of the Devi Bhagavati for the Divine Mother Festival, which is the 9 days of Navratri, which time you build a kund and make a fire ceremony and worship out loud different times a day. You fast. Having install a yantra, and then merge in deep meditation. The worship immerses himself in the 9-syllable mantra, Om Aim Hrim Klim Chamundaya Viche. This is the Nitya Kriya for the worship on the Navratri during the bright fortnight of Chaitra and especially Ashvina. The Bhakta must observe a fast, keep the Navratri vow. The most auspicious days are the 8th, 9th days of the waxing moon. Regardless of who he is, the man who worships the Divine Mother during Navratris has every desire granted. Suratha asked, does the Navratri Homa differ from the Nitya Homa you have described? Rishi Samadhi said, a square altar is built specially for the Navratra, and a vessel of holy water placed on it, upon a yatra just like the one used in the Nitya Puja. Around the vessel, grains are heaped and a pandal is created about the altar. The altar is embellished with bell leaves and flowers, fruits, insects, and many lamps. The Devi is worshipped thrice daily at the 3 sandhyas of each day, at dawn, noon, and sunset. Young girls should be worshipped as embodiments of the Divine Mother herself, with sandal, ornaments, scented oil, and garlands of flowers. The poor and brahmanas are fed, and the bhakta fasts for 9 days and eats his first meal on the 10th. The devotee who keeps the Navratri vow acquires unswerving bhakti for the Devi and has his every wish fulfilled. Sumedha smiled, and his face shone with kindliness. He said to Suratha and Samadhi, the way out of your misery, my friends, is to worship the Divine Mother. Keep the Navratri vow, and all your troubles will end. The suffering in a man's life is only the Devi subtly calling you. She calls you both. Worship her, and she will save you from your distress and bless you someday with moksha. The king and the Vaishva were deeply comforted to hear the Muni's words. They felt hope spring up again in their desolate spirits. They prostrated themselves once more before the sage. When Sumedha blessed them, the Samadhi said, Holy One, we have surely been led to your feet by our punya of past lives. Your wisdom makes us pure. Muni, your peace calms our mind. We will worship the Devi Bhagavati for a fervent tapasya. We beg you to be our guru. They bowed down to him and with his leave took themselves to the bank of the river that flowed nearby and began their worship. They spent a month sitting in Padasana, their eyes shut, chanting the Bija mantras and the 3 legends of the Devi. Bhakti took root in their hearts and grew swiftly. Suratha and Samadhi did nothing else but worship the goddess. But once a day they would come before the Muni Sumedha and prostrate themselves at his feet for his blessing. The bhaktas ate only fruit. A year went by, and they grew stronger by their tapasya. Then they ate only leaves of a certain tree. Another year passed, and both the king and the Vaishva dreamt of the Devi Bhagavati on the very same night. They saw her wearing scarlet robes and unearthly ornaments. During the 3rd year, they were true tapasyans and subsisted only on water. But when 3 years passed and the Devi had still not appeared before them, they grew desperate. The 2 bhaktas said to each other, if we cannot have a vision of the Devi after 3 years of meditation, we may as well not live anymore. Both agreed, and they dug a triangular kund and lit a fire of yagya in it. They meant to make a final sacrifice to the Devi Ambika of their lives. When the fire blazed up, Saratha took his sword and began to slice slivers of his own flesh from his body to feed the flames. Samadhi did the same. They found they felt no pain, but only great exultation at what they did. Their blood flowed, and they offered it in ecstasy to the Devi. Suddenly the fire in the pit of sacrifice burned bright as the sun, and the tapasvins were blinded by white flames like massive columns of light. From those flames the Devi Bhagavati stood forth before her devotees. In her voice deep as the sky, she said, "You are my favorite bhaktis. Ask me for anything, and it shall be yours." Saratha's hair stood on end with rapture, and he said, "Devi, let me vanquish my enemies and have my kingdom back." The crimson Devi said, smiling, "Your enemies are enfeebled. Return to your city and rule for 10,000 years. After this life, you will be born as Suryadeva's son and be known as Sarvani Manu." She turned now to the Vaishva Samadhi, who stood before her with folded hands. She said, "And what would you have of me, Samadhi?" The long tapasya had made Samadhi a wise man. He said softly, "Devi, bless me with wisdom, that the bonds of samsara which bind my heart are loosened. I want enlightenment, Mother of the world. I want to see the truth and to be free." The brilliant Devi raised her hand over him. Next moment she vanished before their eyes, and a common fire burnt once more in the pit of sacrifice, and the wounds they had inflicted on themselves were all miraculously healed. Glowing with their experience, the two bhaktas came to the Muni, Sumedha, and told him what had happened. Just then they heard a great noise at the edge of their ashram. Sumedha smiled and said to Saratha, "Look, Kasatra, your ministers who betrayed you have come to beg your forgiveness." It was true. Not only his ministers, but most of the people as well had come to beg Saratha to return and to be their king once more. They had risen up themselves to kill many of the robbers and had driven the rest out of the kingdom. They fell at his feet and begged his forgiveness, and there was no doubt that the Devi Bhagavati had wrought this miracle. Saratha went home to his kingdom with his ministers and his people and began to rule more wisely than ever. The Devi Ambika's grace was upon the king, and his was a just and prosperous reign. But Saratha was not the only one whom the Devi blessed. As the king's ministers came to Sumedha's ashram, a strange thing happened to Samadhi. He sat some distance from the congregation in the hermitage. His wife and son did not come to ask his pardon or call him back home. Instead, the Devi visited Samadhi again, subtly in his spirit. She loosed a tide of knowledge and joy into him, and she set him free. When he knew the truth, all the Vaishya's old attachments fell away from him like a snake's old skin. 1,000-petaled lotus unfurled in his head, and he was one with the Parashakti, with eternal bliss. The illumined Samadhi spent the rest of his mortal days wandering from one sacred place to another. And when death came to him, the Devi appeared and took him into herself, and he had moksha. So said Veda Vyasa to King Janamejaya. Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vishveshwari Mata ki jai, Bole Baba ki jai.